Chapter 9. For a few days the school could talk little else of the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's mind by pacing the spot where she had been attacked. The thought as though he thought that the attacker might come back. Harry had seen him scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Norris Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but no effect. The words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch was guarding the scene of the crime, he was sulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly or looking happy. Ginny Weasley seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. But you haven't really got to know Mrs. Norris, Ron told her bracingly. Honestly, we're much better off without her. Ginny's lip trembled. Stuff like that doesn't happen often at Hogwarts, Ron reassured her. They'll catch the maniac who did it and have him out of here in no time. I just hope he's got time to petrify Filch before he's expelled. I'm only joking, Ron added hastily as Ginny blanched. The attack had also had effect on Hermione. It's quite unusual for Hermione to spend a lot of time reading, but she was now doing almost nothing else. Nor could Harry or Ron get much of a response from her when they asked her what she was up to. Not until the following Wednesday did they find out. Harry had been held back in potions where Snape had made him stay behind to scrape the tube worms off the desk. After a hurried lunch, he went upstairs to meet Ron in the library and saw Justin Finch Filchy, the Hufflepuff boy from herbology, coming toward him. Harry just opened his mouth to say hello when Justin caught sight of him and turned abruptly and sped off in the opposite direction. Harry found Ron in the back of the library, measuring his history of magic homework. Professor Binns had asked for 3-foot-long compositions on the medieval assembly of European wizards. I don't believe it. I'm still 8 inches short, said Ron furiously, letting go of his parchment, which sprang back into a roll. And Hermione's done 4 feet 7 inches, and her writing's tiny. Where is she? Asked Harry, grabbing the tape measure and unrolling his own homework. Somewhere over there, said Ron, pointing along the shelves, looking for another book. I think she's trying to read the whole library before Christmas. Harry told Ron about Justin Finch Fletchery running away from him. Dunno. Why'd he care? I thought he was a bit of an idiot, said Ron, scribbling away, making his writing large as possible. All that junk about Lockhart being so great. Hermione emerged between the bookshelves. She looked irritable, and at last seemed ready to talk to them. All the copies of Hogwarts, a history, have been taken out, she said, sitting down next to Harry and Ron. And there's a 2-week waiting list. I wish I had left my copy at home, but I couldn't fit it in my trunk with all of Lockhart's books. Why do you want it? Asked Harry. The same reason everybody else wants it, Hermione. To read up on the legend of the Chamber of Secrets. What's that? Harry said quickly. That's just it. I can't remember, said Hermione, biting her lip. And I can't find the story anywhere else. Hermione, let me read your composition, said Ron desperately, checking his watch. No, I won't, said Hermione, suddenly severe. You've had 10 days to finish it. I only need another 2 inches. Come on. The bell rang, and Ron and Hermione led the way to the history of magic bickering. History of magic was the dullest subject of their schedule. Professor Binns, who taught it, was their only ghost teacher, and the most exciting thing that ever happened in the classes was when his his entering the room through the blackboard, ancient and shriveled. Many people he had noticed before he was dead. He was simply got up to teach one day and left his body behind in the armchair in front of the staff room fire. His routine had not varied the slightest since. Today was as boring as ever. Professor Binns opened his notes and began to read in a flat tone, like an old vacuum cleaner, until nearly everyone in the class was in deep stupor, occasionally some coming to a long enough to copy down a name or a date, then falling asleep again. He had been speaking for a half an hour, and something happened that never happened before. Hermione put up her hand. Professor Binns, glancing up in the middle of the dullest lecture of the International Warlock Convention of 1289, looked amazed. Miss, Granger, Professor. I was wondering if you could tell us something about the Chamber of Secrets, said Hermione in a clear voice. Dean Thomas, who had been sitting with his mouth hanging open, gazing out the window, jerked out of his trance. Lavender Brown's head came up off her arm. Neville's Longbottom's elbow slipped off his desk. Professor Binns blinked. My subject is history of magic, he said, in his dry, wheezy voice. I deal with facts, Mrs. Granger, not myths and legends. He cleared his throat and made a small noise like chalk snapping, and continued. In September of that year, the subcommittee of Sardinian sorcerers. He stuttered to a halt, Hermione's hand waving in the air again. Miss Grant? Please, sir. Don't legends always have a basis in fact? Professor Binns was looking at her with such amazement. Harry was sure no student ever interrupted him before, alive or dead. Well, said Professor Binns slowly, yes, one could argue that, I suppose. He peered at Hermione as though he'd never seen a student properly before. However, the legend of which you speak is very sensational, even ludicrous tale. But the whole class was now hanging on Professor Binns' every word. He looked dimly at all of them, every face turned to his. Harry could tell he was completely thrown off by such unusual show of interest. Oh, very well, he said slowly. Let me see. The Chamber of Secrets. You all know, of course, that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago. The precise date is uncertain. By the 4 greatest witches and wizards of the age. The 4 school houses are named after them. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. They built this castle together, far from prying Muggle eyes, for it was an age when magic was feared by common people, and witches and wizards suffered much persecution. He paused and gazed blearily around the room and continued. For years, the founders worked in harmony together, seeking out the youngest and who showed signs of magic and bringing them here to the castle to be educated. But then disagreements sprang up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and others. Slytherin wanted to be more selective about the students that were admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical learning should be kept within all magical families. He disliked the students of Muggle parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. So after a while, there was a serious argument on the subject between Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the school. Professor Binns paused again, pursing his lips, looking like a wrinkled old tortoise. Reliable historical sources tell us this much, he said, but the honest facts have been obscured by the fanciful legend of the Chamber of Secrets. The story goes that Slytherin had built a hidden chamber in the castle, of which other founders knew nothing. Slytherin, according to the legend, sealed the Chamber of Secrets so that none would be able to open it until his own true heir arrived to the school. The heir alone would be able to unseal the Chamber of Secrets and unleash the horror within, and use it to purge the school of all who were unworthy to study magic. There was a silence. He finished telling the story, but it wasn't the usual deeply sleepy silence that filled Professor Bin's classes. There was unease in the air. Everyone continued to watch, hoping for more. Professor Binns looked faintly annoyed. The whole thing is an arrant nonsense, of course, he said. Naturally, the school has been searched for evidence of such chamber many times by most of the learned witches and wizards. It does not exist. It's a tale told to frighten the gullible. Hermione's hand went back up in the air. Sir, what exactly do you mean, the horror within the chamber? Well, that is believed to have some sort of monster which the heir of Slytherin can control, the Professor Ben said in a dry, reedy voice. The class exchanged nervous looks. I tell you, the thing does not exist, said Professor Binns, shuffling his notes. There's no chamber, there's no monster. But, sir, said Seamus Finnegan, if the chamber can only be opened by Slytherin's true heir, no one would be able to find it, would they? Nonsense, O'Flannery, said Professor Binns in an aggravated tone. If a long succession of Hogwarts masters and headmistresses haven't found the thing, but Professor, piped Parvati Patil, you probably have to use dark magic to open it. Just because a wizard doesn't use dark magic doesn't mean he can't, Miss Pennyfeather, snapped Mr. Professor Binns. I repeat, if the likes of Dumbledore, who maybe you've got to be related to Slytherin, so Dumbledore couldn't, said Dean Thomas. But Professor Binns had had enough. That will do, he said sharply. This is a myth. It does not exist. There is not a shred of evidence that Slytherin ever built so much of a secret broom cupboard. I regret telling you this foolish story. I will return, if you please, to the history of the solid, believable, variable fact. And within 5 minutes the class sunk back to its usual stupor. I always knew Slathar Slytherin was a twisty old loony, Ron told Harry and Hermione, and they fought their way through the teeming corridors at the end of the lesson to drop off their bags before dinner. But I never knew he started all that pureblood stuff. I wouldn't be in the house if you paid me. Honestly, if the Sorting Hat would have tried me to put me in Slytherin, I'd have to train straight back home. Hermione nodded fervently, but Harry didn't say anything. His stomach had just dropped unpleasantly. Harry had never told Ron and Hermione the Sorting Hat had seriously considered putting him into Slytherin. He could remember his thought yesterday. A small voice had spoken into his ear. Then when he placed the hat on his head a year before, you would be great, you know. It's all there in your head. The Slytherin would help you on your way to greatness, no doubt about that. But Harry, who had already heard Slytherin House's reputation for turning out dark wizards, had thought desperately, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. And oh well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. As they were shunted along the throng, Colin Creevey went past. Hiya, Harry. Hello, Colin, said Harry automatically. Harry! A boy in my class has been saying you're... But Colin was so small he couldn't fight against the tide of people bearing down toward him on the great hall. He heard him squeak, See you, Harry! And he was gone. What's a boy in the class saying about you? Hermione wondered. That I'm Slytherin's heir, I expect, said Harry, his stomach dropping another inch or two, suddenly remembering why Justin Fletchery had to run away from him at lunchtime. People here will believe anything, honestly, said Ron in disgust. The crowd thinned, and they were able to climb the next staircase without difficulty. "Do you really think there's a chamber of secrets?" Ron asked Hermione. "I don't know," she said, frowning. Dumbledore couldn't Dumbledore couldn't cure Mrs. Norris, and that makes me think that whatever attacked her might not be human." As she spoke, they turned the corner and found themselves at the end of a very corridor where the attack happened. They stopped and looked. The scene was just as it had been the night, except there was no stiff cat hanging from the torch bracket, and the empty chair stood against the wall, bearing the message, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened." "That's where Filch has been keeping guard," Ron muttered. They looked at each other. The corridor was deserted. "Can't hurt to poke around," said Harry, dropping his bag and getting his hands on his hands and knees, so that he could crawl along, searching for clues. "Scorch marks," he said. "Here and here." "Come on, look at this," said Hermione. "This is funny." Harry got up and crossed the window next to the message on the wall. Hermione was pointing to the topmost pane. There were about 20 spiders there scurrying, apparently fighting to get through a small crack. A long, silvery thread was dangling like a rope, as though they had all climbed it in a hurry to get outside. "Have you ever seen spiders act like that?" said Hermione, wonderingly. "No," said Harry. "Have you, Ron? Ron?" They looked over their shoulder. Ron was standing well back, seemed to be fighting an impulse to run. "What's up?" And Harry, "I don't like spiders," Ron said tensely. "Well, I never knew that," said Hermione, looking at Ron in surprise. "You've used spiders' potions loads of times." "I don't mind them dead," said Ron, who carefully looking anywhere but the window. "I just don't like the way they move." Hermione giggled. "It's not funny," said Ron fiercely. "If you must know, when I was 3, Fred turned my teddy bear, my great big filthy into a great big filthy spider because I broke his toy broomstick. You wouldn't like them either if you'd been folding your bear and suddenly it had too many legs and—" He broke out shuddering. Hermione was obviously still not trying not to laugh. Feeling as though he'd better get off the subject, Harry said, "Remember all the water on the floor? Where did that come from? Someone's mopped it up." "It was about here," said Ron, recovering himself to walk a few paces past Filch's chair, and pointing, "level with this door." So he reached for the brass doorknob and suddenly withdrew his hand, as he thought he'd been burned. "What's the matter?" said Harry. "I can't go in there," Ron said gruffly. "It's the girls' toilet." "Oh, Ron, there won't be anyone in there," said Hermione, standing up and coming over. "That's Moaning Myrtle's place. Come on, let's have a look." And ignoring the large out-of-order sign, she opened the door, and it was the gloomiest, most depressing bathroom Harry had ever set foot in. Under a large, cracked and spotted mirror were a row of chipped sinks. The floor was damp and reflected the dull light given off in the scrubs of the few candles burning low in the candle holders, and wooden doors with the stalls were flaking and scratched, and one of them was dangling off its hinges. Hermione put her fingers to her lips and set off afterward at the end of the stall. As she reached it, she said, "Hello, Myrtle, how are you?" Harry and Ron went to look. Moaning Myrtle was floating above the tanks of the toilet, picking up a spot on her chin. "This is a girl's bathroom," she said, eyeing Ron and Harry suspiciously. "They're not girls." "No," Hermione agreed. "I just want to show them how, nice it in here." She waved vaguely to the dirty old mirror and damp floor, asking if she saw anything. Harry mouthed to Hermione. "What are you whispering?" said Myrtle, staring at them. "Nothing," Harry said quickly. "We just wanted to ask." "I wish people would stop talking behind my back," said Myrtle. in a voice choked with tears. "I do have feelings. And even if I'm dead." "Myrtle, no one wants to upset you," said Hermione. "Harry only—" "No one wants to upset me. Oh, that's a good one," howled Myrtle. "My life is nothing but misery at this place, and how people come along ruining my death." "We wanted to ask you if you'd seen anything funny lately," said Hermione quickly, "because a cat was attacked right outside your door on Halloween. Did you see anything near here that night?" said Harry. "I wasn't paying attention," said Myrtle dramatically. "Peeves upset me so much I came in here to try to kill myself, and then, of course, I remembered. I'm, I'm—" "You're already dead," said Ron helpfully. Myrtle gave a tragic sob, rose up in the stir, and turned around and dived headfirst into the toilet, splashing water everywhere and vanishing from sight. Although the direction of her muffled sobs she had come from nowhere in the U-bend. Harry and Ron stood with their mouths open, but Hermione shrugged wearily and said, "Honestly, that was almost cheerful, Myrtle. Come on, let's go." Harry and Ron barely closed the door. Myrtle's gurgling sobs when a loud voice made them all three jump. "Ron!" Percy Weasley stopped dead in the head of the stairs. "Prefect, that's a girl's room," he gasped. "What are you—" "Just having a look around," Ron shrugged. "Clues, you know." Percy swelled in a manner mindful of Harry forcefully of Mrs. Weasley. "Get away from there," Percy said, striding towards them, starting to hustle them along, flapping his arms. "Don't you care what this looks like? Coming back here while everyone's at dinner." "Why shouldn't we be here?" said Ron hotly, stopping short, glaring at Percy. "Listen, we never laid a finger on that cat." "That's what I told Ginny," Percy said fiercely, "but she still seems to think that you're going to get expelled. I've never seen her so upset, crying her eyes out. You might well think of her. All the first years are thoroughly over-excited by this business." "You don't care about Ginny," said Ron, whose ears were now reddening. "You're just worried I'm going to mess up your chances as head boy." "5 points for Gryffindor," Percy said tersely, fingering his prefect badge. "And I hope that teaches you a lesson. Now, no more detective work, or I'll write Mum." And he strode off back down to the neck was red as Ron's ears. Harry, Ron, and Hermione chose seats as far away as possible from Percy in the common room that night. Ron was still very bad-tempered and kept plotting the Chom's homework. While we reached absent-mindedly for his wand to remove the smudges, it ignited the parchment paper. Fuming almost as much as his homework, Ron slammed the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2, slammed it shut. To Harry's surprise, Hermione followed suit. "Who can it be, though?" she said in a quiet voice, as though continuing the conversation they had been having. "Who'd want to frighten the Squibs and the Muggleborns out of Hogwarts?" "Well, let's think," Ron said, mock puzzlement. "Who do we know that think Muggleborns are scum?" He looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back at him unconvinced. "If you're talking about Malfoy, of course I am," said Ron. "You heard him. You'll be next, Mudbloods. Come on. You've only got to look at his foul rat face to know him. No, it's him. Malfoy, the heir of Slytherin," said Hermione skeptically. "Look at his family," said Harry, closing his books too. "The whole lot of them. They've been in Slytherin. He's always boasting about it. They could easily be Slytherin's descendants. His father isn't definitely evil, though." "They could have had the key to the Chamber of Secrets for centuries," said Ron, handing it down father to son. "Well," said Hermione cautiously, "I suppose it's possible. But how do we prove it?" said Harry darkly. "There must be a way," said Hermione slowly, dropping her books, her voice still further, glancing around the room of Percy. Of course, would be difficult and dangerous, very dangerous. We'd be breaking about 50 school rules, I expect. If, in a month or so, you feel explaining you will let us know, won't you? Said Ron irritably. All right, said Hermione coldly. What we need to do is we need to get inside the Slytherin Coleman room and ask Malfoy a few questions without him realizing it's us. But that's impossible, Harry said, and Ron laughed. No, it's not, said Hermione. All we need is some polyjuice potion. What's that? Said Ron and Harry together. Snape mentioned it in class 5 weeks ago. Do you think you've got nothing better to do in potions than listen to Snape? Muttered Ron. It transforms you into somebody else. Think about it. We could change into the three of the Slytherins. No one would know us. Malfoy would probably tell us anything. He'd probably be boasting about it in Slytherin Common Room right now if we could only get hear him. The polyjuice stuff sounds a bit dodgy to me, Ron's frowning. What if we got stuck looking like the three Slytherins forever? It wears off after a while, said Hermione, waving her hand impatiently. But getting a hold of the recipe will be very difficult. Snape said it was in the book called Most Potent Potions, and it's bound to be in the restricted section of the library. There was only one way to get out a book from the restricted section, and we needed to sign note of permission from a teacher. Hard to see why we'd want a book, really, said Ron, if we weren't going to try to make one of the potions. I think, said Hermione, that if we make it sound as though we're just interested in the theory, we might stand a chance. Oh, come on. No teacher's going to fall for that, said Ron. They'd have to be really thick.